The brittle parchment was tucked between two thick ledgers in the deepest corner of the museum's basement. Dust clung to it like a shroud, the edges curled and browned from decades, perhaps centuries, of neglect. Eleanor Vargas, the museum's quiet archivist, eased it out with a reverence normally reserved for rare jewels. She had no authority to examine artifacts beyond cataloguing them. But something about this piece was different. The ink, faded yet stubbornly present, formed a map, not of roads or coastlines, but of jagged lines, symbols, and spirals that seemed to dance together in cryptic harmony. Eleanor had handled countless maps in her 15 years at the archives, yet this one stirred something deep in her chest. Her heart thudded as she ran a finger along the intricate border. The glyphs were unmistakably Mayan, though arranged in an order she'd never seen, and there, in the lower right corner, was a cluster of tiny markings, too deliberate to be decorative, too peculiar to be part of standard cartography. She leaned closer. The parchment exhaled a faint scent of earth and decay, as if it still carried the breath of the jungle it once knew. The dim bulb above flickered, briefly plunging the room into shadow. In that instant, she imagined she was no longer in the basement, but standing before a temple wall, the air thick with humidity and the call of unseen birds. Her day-to-day life was quiet, to the point of invisibility. She arrived before sunrise, slipped through the staff entrance, and descended directly into the archives, where the world's noise couldn't reach her. Curators passed her by without glances. Visitors never knew her name. And even the security guards sometimes forgot she was there. But this discovery was a living pulse beneath her fingertips. Eleanor's training had not been in archaeology, but in historical linguistics. Years ago, she had written a thesis on the influence of celestial events on ancient glyph systems. But after academia chewed her up, she'd retreated into the safety of museum work. That thesis had been quietly buried, much like this map. Now, looking at the strange constellation of marks on the parchment, she felt the old spark ignite. She unrolled it carefully across the long wooden table, using soft weights to keep it flat. The central drawing depicted a pyramid surrounded by 4 smaller structures. Radiating outward were curving lines that ended in stylized depictions of stars. But it was the lower margin that held her attention, those dense, angular symbols that didn't match any known Mayan script catalogue she'd studied. Decoration, she whispered aloud, recalling the word so often used to dismiss anomalies in ancient art. But no. The repetition of certain shapes suggested pattern, the way a poem hides within prose. The footsteps startled her. She hastily slid the map back into partial concealment, just as Dr. Laurence Finch, the museum's lead archaeologist, stepped into the room. Finch, always immaculately dressed in tailored linen and polished leather, looked around as though even the archive's air might stain him. "Vargas," he said without warmth, "still buried down here?" His gaze fell on the parchment. "What's this?" Eleanor hesitated, then replied, "An unregistered map. Mayan origin, possibly late post-classic period, but these," she pointed to the clustered symbols, "aren't part of any decorative canon I know. They might be—" "Might be nothing," Finch interrupted with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Probably the work of an apprentice scribe. Don't overthink it." He brushed past her, glancing once more at the parchment. "I'll have one of the grad interns log it properly. You can return to your cataloguing." The dismissal stung more than she cared to admit. Finch's voice lingered in the air like a closing door, but Eleanor didn't move. When the sound of his shoes faded, she exhaled slowly. She had learned long ago that some doors stayed closed unless you picked the lock yourself. She gathered her notes, carefully rolling the parchment into a protective case. Finch might dismiss it, but she wouldn't. Not this time. As she turned off the light and climbed the basement stairs, a thought formed, quiet but insistent, like the whisper of leaves in a jungle breeze. If the code was real, if it meant something, it could lead somewhere. Somewhere untouched, unseen for centuries. Somewhere waiting. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Dr. Laurence Finch's life. She didn't yet know what the symbols said, but she knew one thing. She was going to find out. And nothing, not Finch, not the museum's rules, not the weight of years in obscurity, would stop her. By morning, Finch's casual dismissal had morphed into a buzzing irritation in Eleanor's mind. She'd replayed the scene over coffee, over her walk to work, and even as she passed through the museum's grand marble atrium where tourists milled about snapping pictures of the massive Olmec head replica. He had looked at the map for less than 10 seconds before discarding its worth. That arrogance wasn't just insulting, it was dangerous. Dismissing history because it didn't fit neatly into a pre-approved framework was how discoveries were lost forever. Still, she kept her expression calm as she descended to the archives. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the familiar scent of aging paper and dust wrapped around her like an old cardigan. But she wasn't alone for long. By mid-morning, the clicking of expensive shoes announced Finch's return. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Still obsessing over that little curiosity? Eleanor kept her eyes on the cataloguing log. It's not an obsession, it's research. Finch chuckled, a sound that was more air than mirth. Research is for scholars with the right background, Vargas, not for, well, basement staff. You've got a good role here. No need to get ideas. There it was, the unspoken boundary he always drew between himself and the rest of the staff. In his mind, Eleanor's job was to quietly store history, not to uncover it. She wondered if he even realized how he sounded, or if his self-importance was too dense to allow self-awareness. I just think the markings are worth a closer look, she replied, keeping her tone even. They're consistent. Repeated patterns don't happen by accident. Finch's smirk deepened. Or perhaps you're seeing patterns where there are none. It's called apophenia, quite common among amateurs. The word amateur landed like a slap. He meant it to. She bit back the urge to defend her credentials, her degree, her publications before she'd taken this quieter life. Instead, she let silence speak for her, but inside she felt the quiet coals of determination glow hotter. When Finch left, muttering something about overzealous hobbyists, Eleanor allowed herself a long exhale. She wasn't angry in the usual sense. Anger faded quickly. What she felt was sharper, colder, and far more enduring. Resolve. Her mind flicked back to her graduate days, to Professor Castaneda's voice explaining that the Mayans were master mathematicians, embedding astronomical alignments into everything from their pyramids to their codices. Patterns weren't decoration, they were language, and sometimes that language pointed to places. That night, the museum was hosting a gala, another glittering excuse for donors to sip champagne under the gaze of stolen artifacts. Eleanor wasn't invited, but she could hear the faint strains of the string quartet from the archives. She stayed late, pretending to finish catalogue entries, until she was certain Finch was upstairs performing his schmoozing ritual. She unrolled the map again, tracing the mysterious markings with a gloved fingertip. They seemed to form constellations, but distorted, warped, as if seen through a lens of time. She copied them into her notebook, then began cross-referencing with digital star maps on her personal laptop. Hours passed unnoticed, and then there it was. Her pulse kicked. The pattern matched a rare planetary alignment recorded in the 9th century, an event so unique it could be used as a calendar stamp. If the map was aligned to that date, it was pointing to a specific moment in time. And if it was pointing to a moment, then it could also be pointing to a place that was significant on that date. The realization was electric. Finch's sneers couldn't erase it. She closed her laptop, rolled the map carefully, and locked it in her personal storage drawer. The museum didn't own her mind, and they didn't own this discovery. Not yet. As she left the archives that night, the muffled sound of applause drifted down from the gala above. Finch would be basking in his own reflection, telling stories that made him the hero of every dig. Eleanor smiled faintly. Let him have tonight. The real story was still hidden. In ink, in stars, in the stubborn hands of a woman who refused to be invisible. The apartment was small and unremarkable. One bedroom, a narrow kitchen, a desk perpetually buried in papers. But to Eleanor, it was her command center. By the time she dropped her bag that night, her mind was already racing through possibilities. She brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to keep her sharp through the early hours, then laid out her notebook, a stack of reference books, and her laptop. The map lay at the center of the desk like a sacred text. She removed her gloves, letting her bare fingertips brush lightly against the parchment. Its texture was rough, uneven, handmade paper, likely from tree bark fibers. She imagined the scribe who'd crafted it, dipping a reed pen into ink, pressing each stroke with deliberation. This wasn't the work of an apprentice. This was someone who knew exactly what they were hiding. She began with the strange symbols. Each cluster contained a repeating sequence, but not in the way of language. No verbs, no nouns, just a rhythmic order, like steps in a dance. She cross-referenced the shapes with the Codex Madrid and Codex Dresden, flipping between pages until the patterns began to whisper their meaning. Astronomical markers, not just stars, but planetary movements. Venus, Jupiter, Mars, the three brightest wanderers in the Mayan sky. The alignment she'd recognized last night was only the beginning. As she plotted them on star charts, a new shape emerged. Not a constellation, but a path. Her pen sketched the curve of the Yucatán Peninsula, overlaying the planetary alignments. The path wove through thick jungle, bypassing known archaeological sites, ending at a blank space, a void where no recorded ruins existed. A shiver ran through her. This is deliberate, she murmured. It's a map within a map. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was a message from Clara, an old graduate school friend now working in Belize. Got your email. If you're serious about this, you'll need boots, machetes, and mosquito nets. And discretion. Eleanor typed back, I'm serious. Can you get a team? Clara's reply was swift. A small one. No official permits yet. Too risky. But I can get you close. Send me the coordinates. She hesitated. Sharing this felt like handing over a piece of her soul. But Clara was one of the few she trusted implicitly. She sent the coordinates, watching the message vanish into the digital ether. Her thoughts drifted to Finch. If he knew what she'd uncovered, he would seize it without hesitation, slapping his name on the discovery before she ever set foot in the jungle. He'd parade it at conferences, his voice dripping with self-congratulation, while she was left a footnote. No, This was hers. She spent the next several hours poring over climate records, satellite imagery, and colonial-era travelogues, cross-referencing anything that might hint at hidden structures. Again and again, her eyes returned to that blank space, a green sea of canopy with no visible breaks. It was perfect. The jungle had swallowed the city whole. By dawn, she had a plan. Clara would arrange a rendezvous point in the Yucatán. From there, they would head inland, following the path laid out by the Celestial Code. The journey would be grueling, but the thought of stepping into a city unseen by outsiders for centuries filled her with a fierce, quiet joy. Before leaving for the museum that morning, she slid the map into a custom-made protective tube and hid it inside the false bottom of her suitcase. Finch could search the archives all he wanted. He'd find nothing but dust and disappointment. As she locked her apartment door, the air outside was crisp, the city just beginning to stir. Somewhere far to the south, under a dense ceiling of green, stone walls waited in silence. And Eleanor Vargas was coming for them. The Yucatán heat hit Eleanor like a wall the moment she stepped off the small propeller plane. It was thick, wet, and unrelenting, the kind of heat that seemed to slow time itself. Clara was waiting at the edge of the dirt airstrip, wearing a sun-bleached baseball cap and a grin that barely hid her curiosity. "You really flew halfway across the continent for a hunch," Clara said as they embraced. "That's the Eleanor I remember." "It's not a hunch," Eleanor replied, tapping the protective tube slung across her back. "It's a map, a coded one." Clara's grin widened. "Then let's go find what it's hiding." They piled into a battered jeep, its paint faded from years of sun and dust. The road quickly gave way to a rough dirt track lined with towering ceiba trees. In the back seat sat two more members of the expedition. Mateo, a seasoned local guide whose knowledge of the jungle seemed almost supernatural, and Luis, a young anthropology student eager for field experience. As the jeep rattled along, Eleanor unfurled the map just enough to point out their intended route. Mateo studied it without speaking for a long moment. "These markings," he finally said, tapping the coded symbols, "they are not decoration. My grandfather told stories of such signs, guides for those who were meant to find sacred places. Outsiders would never understand." Eleanor felt a flicker of validation. Exactly. The code matches astronomical events. If we follow it, we should find something extraordinary. The deeper they went, the more the modern world dissolved. Cell service vanished. The air grew heavier, the canopy denser, until the sunlight itself was a rare visitor. The path narrowed to little more than a trail of flattened grass and occasional machete cuts in the undergrowth. By late afternoon, they set up camp near a shallow river. Clara busied herself with the mosquito nets while Luis unpacked equipment. Eleanor sat by the fire pit Mateo was digging, her gaze drifting to the tree line. The jungle was alive with sound, howler monkeys calling in the distance, the faint rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. That night, under a sky so clear it felt infinite, Eleanor laid the map on her lap and compared it to the stars above. She traced the sequence of symbols with her finger, aligning them with the bright points overhead. The position of Jupiter tonight matched the second symbol exactly. Tomorrow, it would shift, leading them to the next landmark. "You're following the sky," Clara observed, settling beside her. "The Mayans were masters of it," Eleanor replied softly. "This map doesn't just show where to go. It tells when to move. It's like a celestial compass." The fire crackled between them. Clara leaned back on her elbows, eyes on the stars. You realize if we find this city, Finch will lose his mind. Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile. That's just a bonus. Sleep came in fits, broken by the chorus of insects and the occasional splash from the river. At dawn, they moved out, guided by Matteo's machete and the shifting positions of the planets overhead. By midday, they reached the first landmark, a massive stone carved with intricate glyphs, half swallowed by moss and vines. Luis knelt to clear debris from its base, revealing more symbols, identical to those on Eleanor's map. Her breath caught. It was real. The code was real. They pressed on, the jungle closing around them like a living tunnel. Every step forward felt like peeling back layers of time, each more ancient than the last. And somewhere ahead, the city waited, silent, hidden, and untouched. But Eleanor knew the deeper they went, the greater the risk. Nature guarded her secrets fiercely, and not all dangers came with claws or fangs. Some wore polished shoes and linen suits. By the third day, the jungle had become an unrelenting maze of green. The air was so thick that every breath felt like drinking water. Sweat clung to Eleanor's skin despite the early hour, and the constant drone of insects gnawed at the edges of her focus. Still, the map's path held steady. Each planetary alignment matched to a physical landmark that emerged from the undergrowth like a whispered secret. The second landmark appeared mid-morning, a collapsed stone arch, its keystone engraved with a pair of stylized eyes. Matteo paused before it, pressing his palm reverently to the worn surface. "Eyes of the Guardian," he murmured. "It means we are entering a protected space." Eleanor traced the carved eyes with her fingers, the stone warm from the filtered sunlight. "Protected from what?" she asked. Matteo's gaze was steady. "From those who take more than they give." The warning lingered in Eleanor's mind as they pushed onward. The jungle's floor sloped upward into a ridge, and from its crest they glimpsed a distant rise, a hill where no hill should be. The map suggested this was the penultimate marker before the destination. They descended into a low valley, the ground spongy beneath their boots. The canopy above grew so dense it blocked out all but a thin, emerald-filtered light. Luis, trudging just behind Eleanor, broke the silence. "Do you think it's possible? The city is completely intact." Eleanor's voice was steady but cautious. "If the jungle covered it quickly enough after abandonment, and no looters ever found it, yes. But that also means we might be the first outsiders to stand there in centuries." Clara whistled low. "That's going to make certain people very jealous." The terrain grew harsher, roots twisting like serpents beneath their feet. Matteo called a halt at a shallow stream, pointing to a series of carved stones just visible beneath the water. Eleanor knelt, brushing away sediment to reveal yet another glyph, this one a jaguar, teeth bared in eternal warning. Her notebook was filling quickly with sketches and notes, each new glyph confirming the map's accuracy. She felt herself moving not just through space, but through time, walking the path the original scribe had laid down over 1,000 years ago. By late afternoon, the final landmark loomed before them, a massive ceiba tree whose roots wrapped around a mound of carved stone. Matteo's machete bit through the vines, revealing steps. Luis's voice trembled with awe. These are temple stairs!" Heart-pounding, Eleanor compared the scene to her map. The alignment was perfect. Beyond this point, the symbols on the parchment shifted, no longer planetary markers, but a series of concentric circles leading inward to a single point, the city. They climbed carefully, each step releasing the scent of centuries-old moss. At the crest, the jungle thinned, and then, with startling abruptness, it opened. Before them stretched a vast basin, utterly swallowed by vegetation. But beneath the green, Eleanor could see the geometry, the straight lines of plazas, the sharp angles of temple walls, the domes of ancient structures rising above the canopy like the backs of sleeping giants. She felt her throat tighten. "We found it." No one spoke for several moments. The city lay silent, as if holding its breath. Eleanor knew the real work was only beginning, documenting, preserving, and protecting what they'd found. But in that moment, standing at the edge of something lost for centuries, she felt the weight of every dismissal, every condescending remark from Finch, dissolve into nothing. Matteo's voice was barely above a whisper. "You have walked the path of the sky. Now you must walk the path of the earth." Eleanor nodded. The jungle had given up its secret, but it would not give it lightly. They descended into the basin with the sun already tilting westward, the light filtering through in long golden shafts. From above, the city had seemed silent, frozen in time. Up close, it felt alive. Roots coiled like veins across plazas, strangler figs claimed temple walls, and the calls of unseen birds echoed between stone corridors. Eleanor moved slowly, her gloved hands brushing against glyph-covered walls, half hidden by moss. These weren't random carvings. They were stories, histories of rulers, battles, and rituals that had once bound this place together. She photographed each panel with meticulous care, but part of her longed to simply stand and listen, as if the city might speak if given enough silence. Luis, wide-eyed, darted from structure to structure. "This temple is bigger than anything I've seen at Chichen Itza," he said, running his hand along the base of a column. "It's untouched. It's perfect." Clara was less romantic, snapping pictures while scanning for signs of structural weakness. "We'll need a proper preservation team before word gets out," she said. "Otherwise, looters won't get here before someone else tries to claim it," Eleanor cut in. The image of Finch, smiling that hollow smile, flared in her mind. She could already imagine the press conference. Dr. Laurence Finch announces unprecedented discovery in the Yucatán basin. They reached the heart of the city, a stepped pyramid crowned with a crumbling temple. At its base, a wide stone platform bore a single circular carving, a star map almost identical to the one on Eleanor's parchment. Her breath caught. "It's the key," she whispered. The map wasn't just to find the city. It was to find this. Matteo knelt, running his fingers along the carving. "This is the city's calendar. It tells when the rulers would open the gates for ceremonies and when to close them forever." Eleanor's pulse quickened. If the carvings matched the parchment's final sequence, they might reveal why the city had been abandoned, and perhaps even where its last rulers had gone. But before she could start comparing, Clara's voice cut in, low and urgent. "We've got company." Eleanor turned to see a group of men emerging from the jungle's edge. 4, in total, dressed in lightweight expedition gear, but at the front, unmistakable in his pressed linen shirt and broad-brimmed hat, was Finch. Her stomach dropped. He smiled as if greeting an old friend. "Vargas, imagine my surprise finding you here." Eleanor's mind raced. There was no way this was a coincidence. He must have discovered the map's absence and tracked her through contacts, possibly even bribed someone for the coordinates. "How did you—" she began, but Finch held up a hand. "No need for hostility," he said smoothly. "You've done remarkable work getting us here, truly. But you must understand, discoveries of this magnitude require experienced leadership. The academic world will expect it." Louise bristled. "She led us here. She decoded the map. You had nothing to do with this." Finch didn't even glance at him. "History won't remember who carried the machete, son. It will remember who wrote the paper." Eleanor felt the old heat of humiliation rising in her chest, but this time it was tempered by the sight of the city surrounding them, its silent testimony to her work. She looked past Finch to the pyramid, the star map gleaming faintly in the fading light. He could try to steal the credit, but he couldn't rewrite the truth carved in stone. Matteo stepped forward, his voice like gravel. "This place chooses who may lead its story. It does not choose thieves." For the first time, Finch's smile faltered. The air between them thickened, not just with the heat of the jungle, but with a tension that seemed to press in from the stones themselves. Finch's companions, 3 young men with brand-new hiking boots and overstuffed gear, shifted uncomfortably. They were clearly unused to the oppressive weight of the basin or the stares of Eleanor's team. Eleanor stepped forward, the parchment tube still slung across her back. "You can play your games in lecture halls, Finch," she said evenly. "But here you're just another outsider who doesn't understand what he's standing on." He gave a short laugh, though it lacked conviction. "Don't be dramatic. We both know this discovery will need proper funding, media management." "And your name at the top," Eleanor finished for him. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of damp stone and flowering vines. It seemed to swirl around the carved star map at the pyramid's base. Matteo moved to stand beside Eleanor, his posture protective. "You have not earned the right to speak for this place," Matteo said. His tone was calm, but there was iron beneath it. Finch's jaw tightened. "Earned? Please. I've led expeditions across half the globe. What has she done?" Louise stepped forward before Eleanor could respond. "She solved what you called a decoration. She followed a code no one else could see. She found this city. Without her, you'd still be drinking cocktails at the museum gala." A murmur of agreement passed between Clara and Matteo. Finch's assistants looked away, avoiding his eyes. The balance in the basin was shifting, and Finch could feel it. Eleanor crouched by the star map, unrolling the parchment with deliberate care. She placed it beside the stone carving, the 2 images aligning so perfectly it was as if the scribe had been standing in this exact spot 1,000 years ago. "Here's your proof," she said. "This sequence," she pointed to the final concentric circles, "matches the calendar stone exactly. This is what led us here. The city was sealed at the time of a rare celestial alignment. Every landmark on the journey was tied to that same event. This was no accident." She looked up at him, her voice low but carrying. "And you would have thrown it in a storage drawer?" For a long moment, Finch didn't move. His arrogance seemed to falter under the weight of the evidence and the stares of those around him. But then his eyes hardened. "Very well," he said, straightening. "Enjoy your moment, Vargas, but the moment you report this, it becomes mine. That's how the system works." Eleanor rose slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe the story of how Laurence Finch tried to steal credit for a discovery he belittled will be the thing everyone remembers." His lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, he turned and motioned for his team to follow. They disappeared into the jungle the way they had come, their retreat swallowed quickly by the green. Silence settled again over the basin. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves, as though the city itself had approved. Clara broke it first. "You think he'll give up?" "No. Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on the pyramid. "But the difference is now we have the truth carved in stone, and the story to tell it." Matteo's eyes softened. "Then we must make sure it is told with respect. That is the real work now." Eleanor nodded. She knew Finch would try again, but in this place, under these watching stones, his kind of power felt small. 3 months later, the basin was quiet again, the jungle having reclaimed the footpaths they'd cut through its dense green heart. The city still stood hidden beneath its canopy, but now it was protected. Its location carefully documented and stored under multiple layers of confidentiality, shared only with trusted archaeologists and the local Heritage Council. Eleanor sat at a small desk in her apartment, the same one where she had first traced the code in the parchment's faded ink. Only now, the desk was covered in field notes, high-resolution photographs, and transcriptions of the glyphs they had uncovered. The smell of the jungle still clung to some of the papers, a faint, earthy reminder of what they had achieved. Finch had tried, predictably, to stake his claim. Within weeks of their return, he had given an interview to a minor academic journal, hinting that he had been consulted on the discovery. But the photos from Clara's camera told a different story, showing Finch arriving after the city had already been found. Matteo's testimony, along with Luis's meticulous field logs, left no room for doubt. The council had quietly shut down Finch's claims. Though Eleanor suspected his pride would never fully recover, Matteo had been right. The place had chosen its storyteller. And Eleanor had accepted that responsibility fully. She'd turned down several offers from media outlets that wanted to sensationalize the find. This was not a treasure hunt, not a conquest. It was a rediscovery of a history that still belonged to the descendants of its builders. On her desk sat the map, now fully restored and encased in protective glass. The museum had agreed, reluctantly, to list her as its discoverer in the official record, thanks in no small part to Clara's persistence and a few well-placed allies on the board. Each time Eleanor looked at it, she saw not just ink and parchment, but the steps it had taken to reach the basin, the humid nights, the sound of machetes slicing through vines. The moment the green walls had parted to reveal stone geometry untouched for 1,000 years. One evening, as she was reviewing her notes, an email arrived from Luis. "Professor Castaneda wants to include your decoding process in his new book on Mayan astronomy. He says it's the most elegant use of celestial navigation he's seen in years." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, letting the words sink in. Not because of the academic validation, but because it closed a circle, proof that the work she had done quietly, without fanfare, had found its place. A week later, she returned to the museum basement. The smell of old paper was the same, the flickering light above the same stubborn pulse. But as she walked past the rows of shelves, she realized something had shifted. She was no longer invisible. Staff greeted her. Curators asked her opinion on preservation techniques, and even the security guard at the stairwell nodded respectfully. She paused at the far corner where she had first found the map wedged between ledgers. Running her fingers along the spines, she smiled faintly. How many other stories lay hidden here, waiting for someone patient enough to see the patterns others missed? Matteo's words came back to her. It does not choose thieves. The untouched jungle city would remain untouched for now, its stones and stories safe from exploitation. But its existence had already changed her life, reminding her that the quiet observer could be the one to shift the course of history. She closed the basement door behind her, stepping into the cool evening air. Somewhere far to the south, the stars were wheeling over the canopy again, tracing the same alignments that had guided her steps. And she knew, without a doubt, that she would follow them again if they called. Moral: true discovery is not about claiming ownership, but about earning the right to tell a story with respect, patience, and the courage to be underestimated. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.